Tiger tank killed from 2,500 meters. Sherman crews needed 5 tanks to destroy one. Only 2 survived. June 13, 1944, 07:45 hours, south of Villers-Bocage, Normandy. The morning looks wrong for killing. Sunlight lies soft on the hedgerows, turning every leaf into something gentle and green. The air smells of damp earth, crushed clover, hot engine oil. 5 Shermans crawl along a narrow farm track between walls of hedges, 50 yards of space between each hull like measured breaths. Birds are singing above the sound of Continental motors. It feels, to Staff Sergeant John "Johnny" Danforth, less like war and more like a convoy that has somehow slipped out of danger. He sits hunched in the commander's seat of M4A1 number 23, eye pressed to the periscope, chin streaked with dust and old sweat. Ahead, the lead tank silhouette rises and dips with every rut. Behind him, the others follow, patient, exposed. He taps the side of his helmet with 2 fingers, a habit he picked up stateside when he needed to think. On the intercom, his gunner Hayes mutters, "Pretty morning, Sarge." "Too pretty," Danforth says. "Load armor piercing." Private Miller rams an M61 round into the 75mm with a dull metallic shove. "AP up!" Radio crackle. Lieutenant Patterson's voice comes through, flat, trying to sound routine. "All tanks maintain interval. Keep your eyes open. Reports of German armor in the area. Panzer maybe. Could be nothing." Danforth sweeps the glass again. Just hedges, just fields. A farmhouse roof far off. No movement but the lazy swaying of trees. The only wrong thing is the feeling in his gut, the sense of being looked at by something too far away to see. 07:48. The world detonates. The lead Sherman doesn't just stop. It ceases to exist in one clean, impossible gesture. A white flash slams out from its front plate, then a blossom of orange fire erupts through the turret ring. The turret lifts clear of the hull, spinning slow as if the morning has turned to nightmare film. A heartbeat later, the blast wave slaps dust and hot air against Danforth's face inside his own tank. "Jesus! 21 is hit! 21 is gone!" Hayes shouts. "Contact front! I don't see it! I don't see it!" Danforth rams the binoculars to his eyes, but there's only smoke and that obscene column of flame. 7 seconds. The second tank goes. No warning. One moment it's there. The next, it's a torch. Fuel and ammunition venting skyward. The shock rolls back down the lane, through the hedges, into the bones of every man still alive. On the net, Patterson's voice breaks. "We're under fire. Can't see the shooter. God damn it, that's no 47, that's an 88. Tiger, Tiger, Tiger at 2 o'clock, long range." Danforth swings his glass right. At the far edge of the field, beyond the hedgerow line where the land lifts slightly, he catches it. A low gray shape half in shadow, gun already recoiling back into its massive mantlet. It is too big, too calm, too far away to be real. Over a mile, his mind insists. No gun hits like that from there. "Hayes," he whispers, "tell me that's a barn." Hayes doesn't answer. Behind them, another Sherman erupts, a blooming roar that sprays fragments against Danforth's rear armor. The intercom fills with a scream that cuts off mid-word. The lane is now 3 pillars of fire and 2 living tanks, trapped between hedges that funnel them forward into the invisible crosshairs of that gray animal watching from the distance. "Reverse! Get us into the tree line!" Danforth snaps. Wilson slams the transmission. The tank lurches backward, treads shrieking. Earth spits under the weight. Another shot carves the air, a sound like a train tearing the sky. The shell hits so close the tank jumps, shrapnel rattling off the hull like hail. Smoke, fire, ruined steel. 15 men gone in less than 30 seconds, killed by something they still cannot touch. The pretty morning is over. In that moment, as his Sherman claws backward toward the cover of the oaks, Danforth understands the math without needing charts or speeches. Out here, a tiger is a god, and they are made of tin. We thought armor would save us. It wouldn't. Where are you listening from tonight? What city and country? While you picture 5 Shermans facing that one distant gun. Before tigers and hedgerows and burning steel, he was just Johnny from Ohio. John Danforth grew up where the land was flat and honest, where you could see weather coming from half a county away. His father worked the same 60 acres his grandfather had broken with horses. His mother kept a kitchen that smelled of coffee, soap, and warm bread. Summer evenings meant fireflies blinking over corn rows and the lazy clank of a windmill turning against the sky. He was not born for war. He was born for engines. At 16, he could pull apart a tractor carburetor in the dark and put it back together before first light. Old men in town brought him Model Ts and Chevrolets like offerings, and he'd tune them until they purred. There was a satisfaction in it. Metal behaved. If something failed, you could point to the worn gear, the fouled plug, the crack in the block. Machines were honest in a way people never quite were. He listened to the radio with his dad the night news crackled in from Europe, Poland, France, London under bombs. His father shook his head and said, "That's a long way from here." Johnny wasn't so sure. When the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, the distance vanished in one broadcast. The next morning, he went into town, signed the papers, and mailed a letter home explaining after the fact. He asked for tanks, because tanks were engines wrapped in armor and purpose. At Fort Knox, they put him through the grinder, mud, maps, endless lectures on silhouettes and ranges. He learned how to coax an M4 to climb a hill it had no right to climb, how to listen through the seat for trouble in the transmission. When the instructors needed someone to take a bulky Sherman around the training course, they called for Danforth. Command came quietly. He didn't shout. He made sure his crew ate before he did, that they had dry socks when he didn't. Men noticed that. By the winter of '43, he had 3 chevrons and a tank of his own. He wrote letters to his mother on thin stationery, lying about the food and the cold and how scared he wasn't. He kept one photograph in the turret, taped near the radio. His kid sister on the farm porch, grinning, holding a wrench too big for her hand. They shipped out in spring of '44 across a gray Atlantic he never wanted to see again. In England, he saw his first burned-out German tank by the side of a training ground, blackened, hulking, anonymous. He touched the armor with his fingertips, half curious, half superstitious. The instructors talked about German panzers like weather systems, something to respect, to plan around, never to underestimate. Somebody mentioned a heavy tank called Tiger, 100 millimeters of armor, and 88 that could punch through anything they had from ranges that sounded like a bad joke. "Relax," another sergeant said. "There aren't many of them. They can't be everywhere." Johnny took that in, filed it away with the other facts, and went back to checking track tension and bore sighting the gun. You fought with the tank you had, not the one the rumors wanted you to fear. On the night before Normandy, sitting in the dark belly of a transport ship, he ran his hand along the inside of the Sherman's turret one more time. Steel, wiring, gun breech, radio, all known quantities. He told his crew the same thing he always did. Do your job, watch your arcs, trust the armor, we get each other home. He believed it when he said it. He didn't yet know there was a kind of enemy that could turn those words into a lie from 1.5 miles away. June 13th, 1944, 07:48 hours. Villers Bocage. The first shot didn't sound like a gun. It sounded like God slamming the door of the world. Johnny Danforth felt it through the soles of his boots before he saw it. A low tremor that crawled up through the hull, then a shock wave that made his teeth clack together. Ahead of him, Sherman 21 was just gone. The flash was so bright it burned a white spot across his vision. Jesus Christ, 21's hit. I can't see them, Hayes yelled. Smoke, fire. The air inside the tank went thick with cordite and panic. Danforth grabbed the radio. All tanks, contact front, eyes on shooter. Nothing, static. Then another explosion. 22 turned into a tower of fire that swallowed the lane. Tiger! Patterson's voice tore through the radio, too loud, too close. 2 o'clock, long range, too far to see. Too far. That was the impossible part. Johnny pressed his eye to the periscope and swept the far hedgerow. The field shimmered under the heat haze, the trees waving like they didn't care. Then, there, a dark gray hulk barely visible through the branches. Square turret, thick barrel, calm as a cat before the pounce. Target spotted. Christ, it's huge. Fire! Hayes didn't wait. The Sherman's 75mm barked once, the recoil slamming through their chests. They watched the shell arc and bounce off the Tiger's armor like a pebble skipping water. The gray tank didn't even turn. Reload! No, AP! Hell, just shoot again! Before the next round was chambered, the Tiger fired. The shot came with a sound like the air itself tearing apart. A heartbeat later, Sherman 24, their rear guard, erupted behind them. The blast threw dust and burning grass over their own hull. The radio filled with nothing but the sound of men screaming and then cutting off mid-word. Back! Back! Get into the trees! Wilson slammed the Sherman into reverse, gears grinding, engine howling. They lurched backward off the track into the shadows under the oak line. Branches scraped across the turret. Another round hit the dirt 2 yards to the right. The shock wave rattled every bolt in the tank. Dirt poured in through the open commander's hatch. Miller was shaking, but still working the loader, swearing under his breath. Through the slit of the periscope, Johnny saw 3 burning hulks in the field, the grass around them turning black. He'd known all 15 of those men, their jokes, their cigarettes, their talk of home, gone in less than half a minute. Hayes whispered, "We're next." "No," Johnny said, forcing calm into his voice. "We're still moving. Keep low. Watch for the muzzle flash." He caught it then. The faint white wink in the distance, the line of smoke reaching across the air before the sound arrived. "Brace!" The shell screamed over the turret and hit a tree behind them. Wood shattered, raining splinters the size of knives. When the echo faded, there was only the whine of the engine and the smell. Burning fuel, scorched paint, human flesh from the wrecks outside. It was the smell every tanker learned once and never forgot. "Can we hit him from here?" Miller asked. Johnny stared through the periscope, eyes stinging. The Tiger was still there, a mile away, turning its gun slowly like it had all the time in the world. "No," he said, "not from here, not ever." He felt something in his chest go still, the part that believed machines could save you if you were smart enough, fast enough, brave enough. The Tiger's next shot didn't come. Maybe they'd lost him in the trees. Maybe he'd found another target. Johnny didn't care. He just sat there, listening to his own heartbeat thudding louder than the engine. That was the first time he understood that courage had nothing to do with standing your ground. Courage was surviving the seconds after you realized you were already in the sights. And for the rest of the day, that realization would hunt him through every hedgerow of Normandy. When the dust cleared, the only sound left was his heartbeat. The forest swallowed them. Shadows, smoke, and silence broken only by the steady roar of the Sherman's engine. Inside, the crew sat in a silence that wasn't peace. It was the kind that hums right behind your eyes, the kind that comes when every man in the turret knows they should be dead. Johnny Danforth leaned over the periscope, breathing through his mouth to block the stench. Oil, sweat, cordite, fear. Hayes, eyes front. Miller, check the ready rack. Wilson, keep us in cover. Roger that, Wilson muttered, voice tight. His hands were white on the controls. I can't believe they're gone, all of them. Focus, Johnny said softly. We'll grieve later. Right now, that thing's still out there. He glanced through the narrow slit of his vision block. Out beyond the tree line, the field shimmered under the morning sun. 3 Sherman wrecks still burned, thick columns of black smoke curling upward into a sky so blue it made him sick. He reached for the radio mic. This is 23, calling 25, 26. Report. A long crackle. Then a voice, rough with static and panic. This is 26. We're in the tree line north of the road. Tiger's still scanning the field. He's hunting, Sergeant. Hold your fire. Stay hidden. Johnny switched channels. Lieutenant Patterson, this is Danforth. I've got visual on 3 destroyed, 21, 22, 24 gone, 25 and 26 still active. Nothing, just static. Then a burst of interference. Patterson's voice for half a second, then gone. Hayes looked up. You think he's... Don't, Johnny said. The wind shifted, blowing the smoke their way. The smell carried everything war ever meant. Burnt metal, burnt men, the end of promises. Johnny felt his stomach turn but didn't look away. He thought of the men in those tanks. Private Sanders, who'd spent the crossing to France sketching his girl from Kansas City. Corporal Reeves, who could fix a radio with chewing gum and a prayer. Lieutenant Patterson, barely 23, who wrote every report in perfect, crisp handwriting, gone in 30 seconds. He whispered, God damn it! Sergeant? Nothing. Keep low. Minutes passed, like hours. They could hear distant engines. Maybe the Tiger repositioning. Maybe something else. Every sound in the forest became suspect. The snap of a twig, the cry of a crow, the ticking of cooling metal. Then Wilson said, Contact, movement, 3 o'clock. Johnny spun the periscope. Between the trees, through thin morning haze, a gray shape moved. Huge, slow, patient. The Tiger! Jesus, he's coming for us. Hold, hold, Johnny whispered. He pressed the binoculars close. The Tiger turned slightly, its barrel sweeping left to right like a blind god searching for believers. Range? Hayes asked. 700 meters, maybe less. We can't punch through front armor. I know. The Tiger paused. Its engine idled deep and even, a sound that felt alive. Then, suddenly, it fired. The explosion was distant but heavy. It had found something else. Radio crackle. 26 hit. We're burning. Static. Hayes slammed a fist against the turret wall. God damn it! Johnny forced his breath steady. We're the last one left. It was then he realized the cruel rhythm of this war. Not the grand strategy, not flags and maps, just math. 1 Tiger, 1 round, one heartbeat at a time. "Wilson," Johnny said quietly, "we're moving. We're flanking left through the trees. If he's fixed on 26, we get his side." Wilson hesitated. "Sir, that's suicide." "So staying here." The tank lurched forward, branches breaking against the hull. Mud clung to the treads as they crept through the underbrush. The forest grew darker. "Range 500, Hayes whispered. "We'll have a shot in 20 seconds. The Tiger loomed ahead now, its massive turret turned away, still pounding the smoking wreck of 26. Johnny could see the exhaust heat shimmer rising from its rear plate, the one weak point they all knew about but rarely lived long enough to reach. "AP loaded," Miller said. His voice trembled, but his hands were steady. "Fire!" The gun roared. The shell hit the Tiger's rear at an angle. Sparks, smoke, but no explosion. Just a deep clang that felt like failure. "Hit, no penetration," Hayes yelled. "Reload, faster!" They fired again. The second round struck higher, tore a chunk from the exhaust cowling. The Tiger stopped moving. "Did we—" "Wait," Johnny said. The Tiger's turret turned, slowly, deliberately, right toward them. "Oh, no," Hayes whispered. "Reverse," Johnny barked. Wilson slammed the lever. The Sherman jerked backward, crushing brush under its tracks. The Tiger fired. The blast hit the trees beside them, ripping them apart, showering the tank in wood and flame. "We can't stay here," Miller shouted. Johnny knew it. The next shot would hit. "Smoke grenade out," he ordered. Miller pulled the pin and tossed it through the open hatch. A white cloud bloomed instantly, thick and rolling. Wilson swung the tank hard left, engine screaming, disappearing into the fog. For 10 seconds, the world was just white noise, smoke, fear, and prayer. Then silence. They stopped under a collapsed barn at the edge of the forest. Johnny climbed halfway out of the hatch, coughing. He could see the Tiger's silhouette through the smoke, distant again, searching. It didn't fire. It turned away, crawling back toward the main road, its engine fading into the hum of flies and burning fuel. Hayes leaned back against the turret wall. "We're still alive." "Yeah," Johnny said, voice flat. "For now." Outside, the fires kept burning. Inside, 4 men sat in a metal box, breathing each other's fear, waiting for the next sound that would decide if they lived another minute. War wasn't the roar of battle. It was this, the waiting between shots. Noon. The smoke had thinned. The air was heavy with heat and the sour stench of burned fuel. Somewhere beyond the hedgerow, birds began to sing again, a sound so gentle it made Danforth's skin crawl. He hadn't spoken for a while. None of them had. The radio was dead, the antenna sheared off by shrapnel. Their Sherman sat half-hidden beneath the ruins of the barn, an animal that had crawled into a hole to die. Wilson finally broke the silence. "Sarge, we should fall back. Head west, link up with infantry." Johnny didn't answer. He was staring through the periscope at the distant rise where the Tiger had vanished. There was movement again, faint, deliberate, a gray shadow sliding across the far field. "Hayes." "Yeah?" "Get ready to load heat." "We don't have heat, Sarge. Just AP and HE." Johnny cursed under his breath. "Then load AP. Aim for the flank. It's all we've got." The Tiger reappeared fully now, crossing the field at an angle, maybe 1,000 yards out. It was moving slowly, turret scanning, confident, like a hunter coming back to finish a wounded deer. Miller swallowed hard. "He's coming for us." "Good," Johnny said quietly. "Let him." They waited until the Tiger cleared the far hedgerow. The earth trembled under its tracks. Every clank of its tread sounded louder than thunder inside the Sherman's hull. Range 800. Hold. 700. Johnny's pulse felt like a hammer in his ears. The Tiger turned slightly, presenting its right flank. 600. We can take the shot. Hold it, Johnny said. 500. Now. Hayes fired. The 75mm roared. The shell slammed into the Tiger's side, sending a flash of sparks across its armor. Then nothing. Hit! No penetration! Hayes shouted. Reload! Reloaded! Fire again! The second round struck higher, near the turret ring. Another clang. Still nothing. The Tiger stopped moving. Its turret began to turn. Toward them. Jesus, he's spotted us! Reverse! Johnny shouted. Wilson threw the Sherman into reverse. The engine screamed. The Tiger fired. The shot hit a tree just meters in front of them. The blast shredded branches and flung them like knives against the hull. A metal shard tore through the open commander's hatch and grazed Johnny's cheek. Warm blood trickled down his neck. He wiped it with the back of his glove. Again! Fire again! Range 400. Fire! This time, the 75mm shell struck the Tiger's lower side plate, a sharp metallic crack, followed by black smoke leaking from the engine vents. We hit the fuel line! Hayes yelled. The Tiger stopped dead. For the first time, it looked mortal. Fire again before it turns! They fired a fourth round. The shell hit near the same spot. The smoke thickened, flames licking from the rear grill. Reload! AP up! Fire! The fifth shell hit, and this time the Tiger's hull erupted. The blast punched its turret half a meter into the air, then slammed it back crooked on the ring. A bloom of orange fire poured from the hatches. Inside the Sherman, nobody moved, nobody cheered. The sound of the explosion rolled away through the fields like thunder underwater. Wilson whispered, Did we get it? Johnny stared through the periscope. The Tiger burned, a black furnace roaring against the blue sky. He could see one of the hatches blow open, a figure half crawling out before the flames took him. Yeah, Johnny said softly. We got it. Hayes let out a shaking breath. Miller sat back against the wall, hands covering his face. Wilson was laughing, high, broken laughter that ended in a sob. Johnny climbed halfway out of the hatch. The air outside was hot and tasted of gunpowder. He watched the Tiger burn until it was just a silhouette inside a rising column of smoke. He should have felt victory. Instead, he felt empty. That was one, he said quietly. Just one. All around them, the battlefield was silent, except for the fire and the flies. 3 Shermans still smoldered out there, each one a coffin of men he'd known. They had killed a Tiger, but the math still felt wrong. 5 tanks had gone into that field. 2 had made it back. Wilson, Johnny said, still staring at the wreck, turn us around. We're heading west. As they rolled away, he looked over his shoulder one last time. The Tiger's fire burned high and proud like a funeral pyre. He whispered, Nobody wins out here, not really. And for the first time since Normandy, he stopped believing in the word invincible. If you were in Danforth's place, after finally destroying the Tiger that killed your friends, would you feel triumph or only the weight of the dead? The field was quiet by the time the sun began to fall. Smoke drifted low across the hedgerows, and the smell of death clung to everything, to the steel, to their clothes, to their lungs. Johnny Danforth climbed out of the Sherman and stood beside it, boots sinking into the soft French mud. The air was thick with that sweet metallic rot that always came after a tank fight. The only movement came from the heat haze rising off the Tiger's burning carcass half a mile away. The Tiger's fire had dimmed, reduced to a blackened skeleton of armor and ash. It should have been a victory, the kind they put in reports, medals pinned, names listed under destroyed enemy equipment. But standing there, Johnny couldn't feel anything but the cold spreading slowly through his chest. Behind him, Hayes sat on the turret roof, smoking in silence. The cigarette shook between his fingers. 5 tanks went out, he murmured. 2 came back. That's the math of it. Johnny didn't answer. He walked forward a few steps through the half-burned grass. He could see the outlines of the other Shermans, the ones that hadn't made it. Sherman 21's turret lay 50 yards from its hull, black and twisted like the shell of a beetle. The crew was still inside. He couldn't bring himself to open the hatch. He knelt beside the wreck and touched the scorched metal. It was still warm. "Sorry, boys," he whispered. "We did what we could." From the forest edge came the low rumble of more engines. American, thank God. Reinforcements finally pushing up the line. But for Johnny, the fight was over. The Tiger was dead. His friends were dead. The rest felt meaningless. He climbed back into his tank and sat in the commander's seat again. The air inside still smelled of sweat, powder, and oil, the scent of life borrowed for another day. He rubbed the dried blood from his cheek and stared through the cracked periscope at nothing in particular. "Wilson," he said. "Yeah, Sarge." "Keep her running easy. We'll link up with the column and fall back to base. Get her patched, reloaded, ready." "Copy that." The tank lurched forward, treads grinding softly over broken earth. As they passed the wrecks, Hayes saluted each one silently. Miller didn't look up at all. When they reached the road, Johnny turned in his seat for one last look at the battlefield. The Tiger still burned faintly, an orange heart pulsing in the dusk. That was when he realized what victory really meant here. It wasn't medals or headlines or even survival. It was just making it past sunset. One more day above ground. One more chance to breathe. He thought of home, the smell of rain over cornfields, the sound of his father's old truck idling by the barn, things that felt impossibly far away now. Hayes broke the silence. "What'll they call this, you think?" Johnny didn't answer for a long time. Then, quietly, "They'll call it a win, but it doesn't feel like one." The tank rolled west into the fading light, its engine echoing over the fields where fire and silence had made peace with each other. When the guns fall silent, the war keeps echoing inside. Fort Benning, Georgia, autumn 1948. 4 years after Normandy, Staff Sergeant John Danforth stood before a new generation of tankers, watching them clean the breech of an M26 Pershing. The war was over, but its ghosts followed him into every lecture hall, every maintenance shed, every silence between the metallic echoes of drills. The Army called him back as an instructor. His job, teach young men how to fight inside steel, how to live long enough to get out of it again. He could recite every manual by memory, but when he looked at the kids in front of him, 18, 19, faces still unscarred, he wondered how much any of it mattered once the first round came in. At night, when the base quieted, he'd walk down to the motor pool and run his hand along the cold armor of the tanks parked in rows under floodlights. The engines were silent, but he could still hear them, that low, shaking hum that had lived in his chest since Normandy. He sometimes saw it in dreams, the flash of the first hit, the sound of the 88mm tearing the world apart, the burning Shermans in the hedgerow. In the dream, he always turned too late, always shouted too slow. He woke before dawn, heart hammering, the smell of smoke still clinging to his throat. He wrote letters to the families of his lost crew every year on June 13th. He never mailed them, just folded each one, dated it, and tucked it into a box in his locker. "I should have known," one letter said. "I should have seen it first." The Army gave him medals, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and called him a hero. But in his own reckoning, he'd just been lucky. Lucky enough to survive when others didn't. Lucky enough to remember what it cost. Once, during a lecture, a young lieutenant asked him, "Sergeant, what was the hardest part of fighting in a Sherman?" Johnny looked at the kid. Neat uniform, clean hands, the same naive confidence he'd had once. "The hardest part," he said quietly, "was knowing the armor around you wasn't enough. You had to believe in each other more than the machine. The machine just gets you close enough to die." He didn't mean it to sound bitter, but the class went quiet. The lesson stayed. Years later, when he retired, Johnny visited Normandy again. The fields were peaceful now, cows grazing where tanks once burned, the hedgerows green and thick again. He found the spot near Villers-Bocage, where the road curved between the trees. The wrecks were long gone, swallowed by time and earth. Only a faint depression in the soil remained where one of the Shermans had exploded. He knelt there for a long time. The wind was soft, carrying the smell of grass and rain. "You'd never know," he whispered. "You'd never know what it cost." He took off his cap, closed his eyes, and let the silence speak. Wars end on paper, he thought, but they never end inside the men who fought them. The soil forgets the names, but it remembers the fire. This was one man's story, one out of millions swallowed by the war. John Danforth never wrote a book, never sought fame, never called himself a hero. He just came home, fixed engines, raised a family, and tried not to flinch when thunder sounded like artillery. The medals stayed in a drawer, the nightmares stayed in his head. He lived long enough to see movies about the war, glossy, loud, full of triumph. He watched them once, then turned them off. The screen never smelled like burning oil. It never sounded like friends dying in the dark. And yet, he never stopped believing in people. The men who loaded the shells, who kept the tank running even when everything else broke, who reached out a hand in the smoke. That was what survived him. Not the steel, not the battles, but the brotherhood. If you're listening to this somewhere safe tonight, a warm room, lights on, peace outside, remember that comfort was bought by people who sat in noise and fire and never stopped doing their jobs. The tiger that killed them is now a museum piece. The Sherman they fought in is a relic under glass, but the courage that filled those steel coffins, that still belongs to all of us, because war ends, but courage does not. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Tell me your city, your country. Let's see how far their story travels. And the next time you hear thunder roll across an open field, remember this. Once, on a morning too beautiful for killing, 5 Shermans rolled toward a tiger, and only 2 came back.